Hello everyone, this is Mahanur Ali and welcome to my channel Learn with Ease. In today's video, we are going to learn about a very important topic, which is the brachial plexus. Before starting with the topic, let us first understand what does the term plexus actually mean. The term plexus basically means a network, and the term brachial refers to the arm which is a part of the upper limb or the upper extremity. So, the term brachial plexus basically means a network of nerves which form the nerve supply of the upper limb or the upper extremity. Moving on to the proper definition of brachial plexus. The brachial plexus is a plexus of nerves which is formed by the anterior rami of lower forecervical and the first thoracic nerve. In order to understand this definition, we must first understand what does the term anterior rami actually mean. To understand that, let us have a look at the very vague representation of the spinal cord section which is present in the right lower corner of this sheet. In this representation, we can basically see that from the cross section of the spinal cord, there is a dorsal root arising, there's a dorsal root arising, there's a ventral root arising. These both fuse to form the spinal nerves, which then divide to form an anterior ramus and a posterior ramus. The plural form of the anterior ramus is the anterior rami. So, the brachial plexus is a plexus of nerves which is formed by the anterior rami of C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1. Now, moving on to the various components of the brachial plexus. In total, the components are 5, which are going to be the roots, the trunks, the divisions, the cords and the key branches. First, let's talk about the roots. The roots are total 5 in number and arise from the anterior rami of the C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1 spinal segments. Since they are arising from the anterior rami of the respective segments, they are totally 5 in number. There might be a little contribution from C4 and T2 spinal nerves as well, but mainly the main roots are from C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1 spinal segments. Now, moving on to the second topic, which is that of trunks. Now, please have a look at this diagram. Here you can see that the roots of the C5 and C6 spinal segments are fusing with each other in order to form the trunk which is situated in the uppermost position. Hence, this is the upper trunk. The upper trunk is formed by the spinal segments of C5 and C6. The middle trunk is formed by the C7 spinal segment, or the C7 spinal segment itself, or the root of C7 itself continues as the middle trunk. Moving on to the lower trunk. The C8 and T1 roots fuse with each other in order to form the lower trunk. Hence, there are totally 3 trunks in total, which are the upper trunk, the middle trunk and the lower trunk. Now, let us move on. Another point about the trunks is that the trunks lie in the neck in between the scalenus anterior and the medius muscles. Now, please imagine that the roots are basically continuation of the anterior rami of the lower forecervical and the first thoracic nerve. The roots are going to be situated in your neck. Then the trunks are also going to be situated in your neck. As these trunks are then going to descend downwards, these trunks are, each of this trunk is going to divide into an anterior division and a posterior division. This is the upper trunk dividing into an anterior division and a posterior division. This is the middle trunk which is dividing into an anterior division and a posterior division. And this is the lower trunk which is then going to divide into an anterior division and a posterior division. For convenience sake, I have basically interchanged the position of anterior and posterior in this case. This will basically help us to understand the diagram in a simpler way. And please remember that all these 6 in number, anterior and posterior divisions are situated behind the clavicle. Okay, first we had roots in the neck, which were they formed trunks, and these trunks while descending divided into anterior and posterior divisions which are situated behind the clavicle. Now, these anterior divisions and posterior divisions will further form 3 cords: the lateral cord, the medial cord and the posterior cord. Now, For better understanding, I've basically represented the anterior divisions and posterior divisions separately and as follows. See, the anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk is going to fuse to form the lateral cord. How will we represent this in the diagram? Okay, we had trunks, the upper trunk, the middle trunk and the lower trunk. The upper trunk gives two divisions, anterior division, okay, anterior division and a posterior division. The middle trunk is again going to divide into an anterior division and a posterior division, and the lower trunk is also going to divide into an anterior division and a posterior division. However, for convenience sake, I've marked the lower division as anterior and the one above it as posterior. So now you can see that the posterior division arising from the upper trunk, the posterior division arising from the middle trunk, and the posterior division arising from the lower trunk, all three of them fuse to form a cord. This cord is basically going to be the posterior cord. Okay, so the posterior cord is formed by the posterior division of the upper, middle and lower trunks. Okay, we are done with posterior divisions. Moving on to the anterior divisions. The anterior division of the upper trunk and the anterior division arising from the middle trunk. Both of these anterior divisions arising from the upper trunk and the middle trunk fuse to form a cord which is known as the lateral cord. And what is left now? The only division which is left is the anterior division of the lower trunk. The anterior division of the lower trunk continues as the medial cord. Right? So we had three trunks, an upper trunk, a middle trunk and a lower trunk. Each of these trunks divided into an anterior division and a posterior division. The anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk together formed the lateral cord. The posterior divisions of all these three trunks formed the posterior cord, and the anterior division of the lower trunk continued as the medial cord. Right? These cords are then later going to divide as the terminal branches. But apart from these terminal branches, there are other branches as well, about which we are going to learn later in the same video. Okay. So divisions, each trunk divides into anterior, posterior, and these divisions are situated behind the clavicle. Cords are going to be three in number: the medial cord, lateral cord, and the posterior cord. The posterior divisions of upper, middle, and lower trunk fuse with each other in order to form the posterior cord. And the anterior divisions of upper trunk and middle trunk together form the lateral cord, and the lower trunk, anterior division of the lower trunk itself continues as the medial cord. Now, moving on to the branches, which is the fifth component of the brachial plexus. Now, please remember that branches are going to be formed not only by the cords, but these branches can arise from any part of the brachial plexus. That is, from roots till the cords. You can find branches might arise from roots as well. They can arise from trunks, and again the cords are also going to give out certain branches. Now, what branches do roots give us? We know that brachial plexus is going to be formed by 5 roots: C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1. From C5 alone, we have 2 nerves arising. First is going to be the dorsal scapular nerve, and another one is going to be the phrenic nerve. Okay, from C5 we have 2 nerves arising, which are going to be the dorsal scapular nerve and the phrenic nerve. Please have a look at the diagram over here. Here you can see that there are 3 roots over here: C5, C6, C7. From C5 alone, we have 2 nerves arising: the phrenic nerve and the dorsal scapular nerve. Okay, now from C5, C6 and C7, from these 3 roots together, we can see that there's another nerve arising whose name is the long thoracic nerve, or the nerve to serratus anterior. If you've watched my video regarding serratus anterior, you know that serratus anterior is basically a muscle who has a serrated appearance and whose attachment is onto the lateral side of the ribs. And it's obviously going to be situated over the lateral side of the ribs. This is going to form the long thoracic nerve, or the nerve to serratus anterior, whose root value becomes C5, C6 and C7. Okay. Now, From the roots of C5, C6, C7 and C8, we have the nerve to longus colli. Okay? Now we are done with the branches which arise from the roots. From this diagram, as you can see, from C5, we have the phrenic nerve arising and the dorsal scapular nerve. From C5, C6 and C7, we have the long thoracic nerve. Now, moving on to the trunks. We know that roots are going to form trunks. There are three trunks, upper, middle, lower trunk. From the upper trunk, you have two branches arising, which are the suprascapular nerve and the nerve to subclavius. And please remember that branches arise only from the upper trunk. So if this is the upper trunk, there are going to be two branches arising from it. This is the suprascapular nerve and this is the nerve to subclavius. Okay? Next. Now directly we move on to the cords. We know there are three cords in total, which are going to be the lateral cord, the posterior cord and the medial cord. To remember the branches of lateral cord, medial cord and posterior cord, I have certain abbreviations which prove to be pretty useful for me. So I've shared the same with you people over here. First of all, moving on to the lateral cord. Okay, the lateral cord gives off three branches and the abbreviation which you can use to remember the same is LLM. Okay, the first L is for lateral pectoral nerve. The second L is for lateral root of the median nerve. And the third M, the first here M is going to stand for the musculocutaneous nerve. Okay, lateral cord, LLM. Lateral pectoral nerve, lateral root of the median nerve and musculocutaneous nerve. Now please remember that if there is a lateral pectoral nerve, there has to be a medial pectoral nerve as well. And if there is a lateral root of the median nerve, there has to be a medial root of the median nerve as well. Okay? Medial cord has 5 branches, out of which we've tackled 2, which are the medial pectoral nerve and the medial root of the median nerve. Apart from this, we have 2 more nerves whose name starts with M, which is going to be the medial cutaneous nerve of arm and the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm. Apart from these 4 M's, we have a U, which basically means ulnar nerve. Another mnemonic, which I mean not mnemonic as such, but a word which you can use to remember is MUM. Okay, M-U-M-M. First you can say is going to be the medial pectoral nerve, the ulnar nerve, the medial root of the median nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of arm and the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm. Okay. Now moving on to the branches of the posterior cord. The word which you can basically use to remember the branches of the posterior cord is star. Here the S from the S, we basically have 2 branches arising. One is going to be the upper subscapular nerve and another one is the lower subscapular nerve. So S here stands for subscapular, where you have an upper subscapular and a lower subscapular nerve. Next from T, we have the thoracodorsal nerve or the nerve to latissimus dorsi. Next A here is going to stand for axillary nerve and R is going to stand for the radial nerve. So now let us revise about the branches once again. Okay. From the roots, C5 we have 2 nerves arising, dorsal scapular nerve and the phrenic nerve. Apart from this, C5, C6, C7, from these 3 roots we have another nerve arising, which is the long thoracic nerve or the nerve to serratus anterior. Okay, from this diagram, C5 phrenic nerve, dorsal scapular nerve, C5, C6, C7 lateral thoracic nerve over here. From these trunks, only the upper trunk is going to give off 2 branches. One is going to be the suprascapular nerve and another one is going to be the nerve to subclavius. Okay, moving on to cords, we've got 3 cords, lateral cord, medial cord and the posterior cord. From the lateral cord, LLM, lateral pectoral nerve, lateral root of the median nerve and musculocutaneous nerve. Moving on to the medial cord, we've got MUM, okay, M-U-M-M. First M is going to stand for medial pectoral nerve, ulnar nerve, medial root of the median nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of arm and medial cutaneous nerve of forearm. Moving on to posterior cord, star. S stands for subscapular, where you have an upper subscapular nerve and a lower subscapular nerve. T is going to stand for thoracodorsal nerve or nerve to, also known as the nerve to latissimus dorsi. A is going to stand for axillary nerve and R is going to stand for the radial nerve. Okay, this is the lateral cord. This is lateral pectoral nerve. This is muscular cutaneous nerve. This is the lateral root of the median nerve. See, if this is the median nerve, this is going to be the lateral root arising from the lateral cord. Next, we'll go to medial cord first. From the medial cord, you can basically see that here we have the medial pectoral nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of arm, medial cutaneous nerve of forearm, and a medial root of the median nerve. This lateral root and medial root are fusing with each other in order to give the median nerve. Okay, and medial cord also gives off a very important nerve, which is the ulnar nerve. Okay, so we are done with mum. Okay, in lateral cord, lateral pectoral nerve, lateral root of the median nerve, muscular cutaneous nerve, LLM, and coming to the posterior cord. Star is the word which you can use to memorize the branches. S first is subscapular, upper subscapular, lower subscapular. T is going to stand for thoracodorsal. A is going to stand for axillary nerve and R is going to stand for the radial nerve. Okay, so here we are done with the branches. Once again, let's have a look at the brachial plexus. And this is going to be kind of a summary. So, there are roots arising from C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1 spinal segments. These roots of C5, C6 fuse to form the upper trunk. C7 itself continues as the middle trunk. C8 and T1 roots fuse to form the lower trunk. Upper trunk gives off anterior-posterior division. Middle trunk gives off anterior division and a posterior division. Lower trunk again gives off a posterior division and an anterior division. Okay. Anterior division of the upper trunk and middle trunk, upper trunk and middle trunk fuses to form the lateral cord. The anterior division of the lower trunk itself continues as the medial cord, and the posterior divisions of all three trunks fuse to form the posterior cord. Okay, three cords, lateral, posterior and medial cords, and from these cords you can see certain branches arising. For further information about the branches, please have a look at the, you can take a screenshot of the paper of the sheet which is representing the branch.